Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, it's The Metro on WDET, Detroit's NPR station. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the program, sometimes we forget Detroit is a border city. There's a whole other country across the river.
And our neighbors in Canada feel the reverberations of what happens here.
Also, comic book artists are setting down their sketch pads to celebrate the storied history of comics.
We'll get some color about that later, but first, Detroit has changed a lot. The city has reduced blight. The street lights are functioning. Parks and rec centers have been renovated. EMS response times are faster, and neighborhoods have gotten more speed bumps. Meanwhile, the budget is balanced, and downtown has improved. Overall, Detroit is a place where people are no longer leaving in droves. In fact, some are moving in.
Those are some of Mayor Mike Duggan's major accomplishments. He's led the city through these transformative changes since his election in 2013, and that was just after Detroit filed for bankruptcy. So we're looking back at these accomplishments today because last week Duggan announced he won't run for another term.
Now, there are challenges Duggan didn't overcome during his 3 terms. He didn't improve public transit much for residents. He wasn't able to make auto insurance affordable for residents. And the population continued declining when he was in office, though last year, Detroit did see a little bump in population for the first time since the 1950s.
And it might have been a little bump, but it holds a lot of significance given Detroit was losing people for so long. So how should we remember Duggan? Where will he go next? And who might replace him? To discuss all of that and probably a little more, we have WDET's senior news editor, Quinn Kleinfelter here. Quinn, welcome back to the Metro.
Nice to be here.
So, Quinn, let's review. Why is Mayor Duggan not running, and why did he announce this now?
Well, much of what you just said is behind the reasoning, or so what he said publicly. He had, when he first got in, set a goal and said, judge me by whether or not the city's population ever increases. The next year, it didn't. The next year after that, it didn't. I mean, it was such a long time. And then finally, after fighting with the Census Bureau in 2022, for the first time in decades, Detroit's population did go up by about 1,000 people. And it gives Duggan room to say that, hey, that's one of the major goals I've had. I've reached that. And so this is a time where it's best, if he's not going to run again, to step aside, both because he has maybe his own political plans and also to try to clear the field and give about a year's worth or more of people who would want that job to be able to campaign freely without Duggan's potential run hanging over him.
So he's not going to pull a Biden, is what you're saying?
Not in very many ways. Although, you know, it is interesting. I mean, to be honest, Biden has had such a long history with Detroit and with Duggan. I mean, when Duggan got in, the city was mired in bankruptcy. And Biden would come in and actually say that Obama was making cracks about it, that he'd been put in charge of trying to help Detroit get out of bankruptcy, and that Biden was now, quote, the vice president of Detroit. But Duggan always loved that, and they would bring in money for buses, money to try to smooth over things to get him out of bankruptcy, and that was the hurdle that was facing Mike Duggan when he first took office.
Okay, and just to be clear, I'm just referring to the fact that Mayor Duggan is stepping aside with plenty of time for other candidates to make their case.
Actually passing the torch instead of just giving them 3 months to take it and run.
Exactly. So, and we know Mayor Duggan has been quite popular, and that's notable in part because he's a white dude overseeing a majority black city where Black residents have faced all kinds of systemic discrimination, segregation, economic and physical pain. Here he is talking a little about why he almost didn't run because he didn't think he'd be an appropriate candidate for the job.
And I thought, this is too hard. The racial pain and division in this city is too historical. It runs too deep. I'm just not going to be able to get past it. And when I got up, that lady came up to me. She took my hand like she had an iron grip. And she looked me in the eyes and she says, I'm 80 years old. She says, and I haven't voted for a white man for mayor in 50 years. She said, but I'm going to vote for you.
Quinn, what did Duggan do to bring others together and build a coalition that believed in him and his mission?
Well, he took parts of what the city was dealing with and actually made dents in them after people for the longest time had not been able to. As I said earlier, he came in while the city was in the midst of bankruptcy proceedings, and he really, even though he was mayor, was not in charge of it. There was an emergency manager that was running Detroit's finances. It took 3 balanced budgets before they could actually restore governmental control to the city of Detroit itself, which is what happened with him. And as he took office, he began to do things that the city had waited for a long time. They fixed many of the street lights that had been a problem for a lot of people in terms of the dimness and what could be going on in those areas. He helped improve the police and emergency response times, and he tackled blight, which has always been a huge issue as people had moved out of Detroit. They had demolitions of thousands of buildings, rehabbed other thousands, sold them through the land bank. And even though there were some controversies about the actual demolition program itself in terms of payments, the city and stretches of it, particularly downtown, certainly has had a much different shape since Duggan had become mayor.
And Quinn and Tia coming into the conversation. Duggan has led a lot of major efforts, like you said. One of the ones that I noticed is the speed bump effort. But here he is discussing some of those.
I'm proud of the direction the city is heading. I'm proud of the wealth gain of Detroiters in their home values. I'm proud of all the thousands of people working in the plants that weren't here 10 years ago.
So, Quinn, as a reporter covering him for years now, what do you think were some of the biggest major efforts that he was able to accomplish?
Well, we talked about it a little bit ago, and he just mentioned it right then, as well, some of the development coming into the city. For the longest time, I talked to a person as I was coming into work today, just off the cuff, who said that, Detroit just does not look now the way that it did before, where the downtown was boarded up when you went through it. One of the concerns always is whether or not the development downtown would actually make it out to the neighborhoods. And Duggan has tried to take some steps for that, but it hasn't exactly gotten there the way they would hope. They've helped to lower the poverty rate in the city and the homicide rate, although the homicide rate is still way too high and the poverty rate's like 3 times the rest of the state. But the demolitions and clearing off land gave them some room to be able to get more factories and things in and bring in more jobs, which he's pushed as well. Again, there's a downside with that because people nearby will say some of the factories have messed up the environment that they got to breathe, and so there's environmental concerns. But overall, when people look at it, just from talking to people often around the city, they say, you can see Duggan's legacy in a city now that looks like it's thriving, where when he took office, it did not.
Yeah, Quinn. And, actually, we had Anika Goss, CEO of Detroit Future City on Created Equal yesterday, talking a little bit about Duggan and his legacy here. And during Duggan's mayorship, Goss says Detroit's rate of black home ownership has increased to its highest level since the housing crisis, and the percentage of vacant land in the city has decreased. However, there are still large income gaps within Detroit's middle class rates of education, as well as some other things that we're seeing within the black middle class here in Detroit. So we are seeing things happen throughout through the time. We're seeing increases, especially amongst the black population. But anecdotally, from you, Quinn, what have you heard, especially when we're talking about the growth of the black community in Detroit?
Well, one of the things that when they talk about the properties, again, a concern about that was whether they were overassessed. And, were people having to pay too much for that? And Duggan has fought for that. He tried to get a few things through in Lansing that didn't come through necessarily. But again, when you talk to people, there was the racial component because he was the first white mayor in decades, and a concern since Detroit is a majority black city, if he'd really be able to feel what other people were going through in the city and be able to actually take those issues on. And from most people that you talk to, at least that I've talked to, they believe he has, and I guess one of the other things too is that when he did come in, the city was in bankruptcy. There'd been a lot of concerns over corruption, the Kwame Kilpatrick racketeering cases, lots of things like that the city was still trying to recover from, reeling in effect. And now, when you not only is that not necessarily a concern, but there's things like, they're worried about over-assessing properties. They're not worried about whether or not the mayor is actually stealing bunches of money and giving it to his friends and things like that. So that sense has gone away compared to what it was when Duggan first got in.
Yeah. If you're just joining us on the Metro, we're speaking with WDET's senior news editor, Quinn Kleinfelter, about Mayor Duggan's decision not to run for re-election in 2025. I'm Tia Graham here with Robin Vincent. And, what is he going to prioritize before he leaves office?
In my view?
Yeah, Quinn.
Figuring out what he's going to do for his next office, probably. Two things. I mean, that's not to be too facetious, but he said even during some of the announcement that you were playing earlier that he gets in the staff meetings and says, well, we still have a to-do list of this, and this because there's things that the city has not been able to come forward with. Again, the development out in the neighborhoods and other areas that people really would like to see. At the same time, there are lots of experts who believe that Duggan is going to prepare to run for governor because Gretchen Whitmer will be term limited out in 2026. And there's a lot of talk about whether or not he would be the best candidate if he's going to do that. He even mentioned it during his announcement that he wasn't going to run again because he said that he would have an official announcement about that in a few weeks, is what he was telling reporters. And it's, potentially something where he'd have a good shot at it, according to some experts. The other thing is there's other people that could be running, people like Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, or even Pete Buttigieg, who is now a Michigan resident, people who have a name recognition beyond the Metro Detroit area. And that's one of the things some pundits have said is whether or not, even with the resurgence of Detroit, is Duggan known enough in Grand Rapids or just Traverse City or wherever else to really be able to launch a good statewide campaign? Then again, people talked about could he run Detroit? And, people would, if he ran again, it's very likely he'd win.
Let's stay in the present moment for this time, if we could, because Mayor Duggan is still in office. And so for all his accomplishments, he's struggled with some things. He wasn't able to speed up the bus times much and improve mass transit in the city. He wasn't able to pass a regional transit authority millage that would have expanded public transit in Southeast Michigan. And he pushed for reforms to auto insurance in Lansing that hasn't helped a lot of Detroiters still paying high premiums for car insurance. Now, he did stop the outflow of people from Detroit, but the inflow so far is fairly small. So what do you make of the things that he's struggled with, Quinn?
All of that you've said is true, and there's been other questions besides. I mean, not only questions about the money that was paid throughout the demolition program, but also some about whether he directed some funds to a person who eventually now has become his wife, and there were public concerns about all that. I still, when you talk to people around the city, at least when I do, one of the things they will say is Detroit looks different. And it feels different because it was always in debt. It was struggling so much. That's why it wound up being in bankruptcy. And in part, maybe large part, because of Duggan's efforts, that is not the case now. And it's a different landscape throughout Detroit, at least certainly in the downtown area.
WDET's senior news editor, Quinn Kleinfelter, thank you so much for your reporting and your insights, and thank you for joining us here on the Metro.
You're very welcome.
From the WDET newsroom, the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department sent more than 200,000 letters to homes and businesses that have or may have lead service lines. The EPA requires cities to send such notifications.
Coming up, we'll talk about a local art exhibit that aims to uplift the educators who are nourishing upcoming artists. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. The College of Creative Studies is in the business of educating future visionaries. The teachers there make it their mission to stoke the flame of creativity already inside the students they teach. But how do educators help students find their niche? In the partnership with a network of material artists throughout the Midwest, CCS is highlighting educators. The new exhibit is on display now at the Valade Gallery at CCS, and joining us live in studio are two of the curators of the exhibit. Jeremy Noonan is a professor and selection lead of fiber and textiles at the College of Creative Studies, and Heather McCulley is an associate professor of fashion and fibers at Wayne State. Heather and Jeremy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So we're going to start off with you, Jeremy, but those who are educators in the world of art. So we're going to start with the art education in grade school and in high schools. And when we think about the city of Detroit and similar communities, art programs have disappeared or are disappearing. What can educators at this level do to reach kids and young people?
Well, I think that fiber processes is a really affordable way to bring art into the classroom. There are organizations out there that really help supply materials like Arts and Scraps in Detroit. Want to give a shout out to them because we are a frequent visitor of them to acquire materials. But I do feel like they cater to elementary, middle, and high school educators that need affordable materials to bring into the classroom and teach them techniques and skills that are really something that is both historic and can be interpreted in a very contemporary way.
Yes, which we will get into because I love the world of fiber arts. But just the same thing to you, Heather, when we think about teaching young kids and high schoolers and really trying to bring them into the creative sphere, in what ways are you seeing and in what ways do you see fiber art connecting with them?
I think one of the main things that they get attracted to when they get exposed to fiber techniques is the dexterity possibilities, and they see that they can make something with their hands, right? And then they get a sense of pride when they start to develop something from nothing into a cloth or into a basket. So I think I think it's a sense of pride, like I already said, that they really feel good about themselves. And then that kind of snowballs into wanting to explore other techniques.
I just think about kids in Play-Doh or just trying to play with just different things using their hands, like you said, and that is a really, really cool way to get them to get their hands going and moving. But the same thing about college level, because we're in a different realm when you talk about college and you're teaching adults now. And for college professors, have you all noticed any type of gaps within the learning process, especially when we talk about arts programs? Especially when we're talking about the kids that you're possibly teaching from Detroit schools, and they may not have arts programs, but they're interested in art and they really want to do it in college. So are you seeing those gap there, and how are you all filling them in? We're going to start with you, Heather.
Maybe it depends on the student's background, right? Like some students will learn it from their parents if they weren't exposed, in school. But it's not too difficult to bridge that gap where the students come in at different levels, because you have to teach typically basically from the beginning for them to develop all of the different techniques. I mean, there are so many. There's weaving, knitting, felting, embroidery. I mean, it goes on and on. So most students, even if they've been sewing since they were young, haven't had an experience of actually weaving or felting, making the cloth. So it tends to even out for, I guess, to, I don't even know what I'm trying to say, but like excel through the process of making.
Yeah, college is the great equalizer for art students. I love that. It's like this, we're all going to start from the same base. And the same thing goes to you, Jeremy, when we talk about the collegiate level and teaching, especially using fiber arts. In what ways are you guys seeing this unique way to kind of blend them all together and bring everyone together with fiber art?
Well, fiber art is a pretty expansive field, and it's a very inclusive field also. And so I think that students utilize these skills and techniques as a means for self-expression. And so they're able to find voice in object making and the skills that they learn in these introductory courses.
Yeah. And one of my favorite things is and Robin and I were talking about this earlier, trying to figure out like the different examples of fiber art so audience members and listeners can understand the vast array of things that you can do in the umbrella of fiber art. So Heather, we're going to start with you, and then if Heather misses anything, Jeremy, fill it in.
I can do that.
Yeah, get in there.
So Heather, go ahead, start us out.
Sorry, vast. You want to know the techniques?
Yes.
So I will say at Wayne State, we cover weaving, print and dye, so that could be natural dyeing, synthetic dyes, screen printing. We also do coiling for basket making. We do tufting, which is kind of like piled rugs for people that don't know what I'm saying. Yeah. And then we also have a jacquard loom, which allows students to do more digital weaving. What else?
I am a little more specialized in digital technology, so I try to bridge the gap using software like Photoshop or Illustrator, allowing students to develop artwork and pattern work, and then utilizing different output methods. So it might be laser cutting or digital printing to get their artwork onto cloth, which they then will sew with or construct sculpture with.
Which is the perfect segue here, because if you are just joining us right now, you're just tuning into the Metro on WDET Public Radio in Detroit. I'm Tia Graham with Robin Vincent, and joining us in studio is Jeremy Noonan. He teaches fibers and textiles at the College of Creative Studies, and Heather McCauley. She is a teacher of fashion and fibers at Wayne State, and we're chatting about a new fiber arts exhibit happening at the College of Creative Studies. And I want to bring in that exhibit itself and talk a little bit about the exhibit, the importance there. There's the 14th annual conference that's happening, and I just thought this was so fascinating because there's 14 years of this conference happening that's celebrating fiber art and the educators of the fiber art world. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't think enough people understand the world of fiber art. So can you talk about this exhibit and why it's being chosen to highlight the educators of the world?
Well, mainly we had volunteered to host the conference in Detroit this year, and so myself, Jeremy, and then Joey from Cranbrook also was involved. And so we decided that we would host it, and then I had asked Jeremy if we could somehow get exhibition to highlight the educators of the Midwest in fiber art. Yeah. And then we also thought it was really important to bring in the Detroit fiber artists. So then we had a kind of like the people who would come to the conference would get to see what Detroit has to offer in fiber art, and then also the Detroit artists could see what's happening elsewhere within the Midwest.
Yes. And Jeremy, Detroit's fiber art world, what does it look like?
Well, we've had a renaissance in Detroit the past couple years of fiber art altogether. I have to give a shout out to Joey Quinones, who's not here today. That is our third curator. They are the artists in residence and head of fiber in the department at Cranbrook Academy of Art. And so the goal really was to inspire each other by coming together and offering this conference. And so when Heather reached out to me in February, she asked about having an exhibition at the institution. I reached out to our exhibitions coordinator, Lucy Cahill, and they told me I had about 24 hours to write a proposal before all the exhibitions were reviewed by the committee. So I flipped it around really fast. They approved it. I'm very thankful for. Thank you, Lucy, and the exhibitions team. But we really wanted to bring this exhibition together to celebrate Midwest educators in Detroit, inspired by the annual conference that we just held 2 weekends ago. Mm-hmm. The annual conference is called the Midwest Fiber Art Educators Network. It's called MFAEN for short, and it was founded in 2011 by Janice Lessman Moss, who is a professor emeritus at Kent State University, and Roland Ricketts, who is a professor at Indiana University in Bloomington. The organization's goal is to bring together individuals teaching fiber, textiles, and material studies in programs to share curriculum and discuss the field of fiber art in a supportive environment.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that stood out to me just now was the fact that, number one, you have College of Creative Studies working with Wayne State, who's also working with Cranbrook, the other curator as well, Joey. And so I'm thinking to myself, this is not something that I see often, the communal come together, this big, especially with large universities and large institutions coming and working together in this collaborative way, especially with fiber art. So I'm going to ask you both the question about this coming together, this community that you all are building, especially between the College of Creative Studies and Wayne State and Cranbrook and other large institutions that are here simply to help students in the city of Detroit. So Heather, starting with you, talk about the collaboration and being able to work with other large institutions to put something on like this.
I mean, it offers more opportunity, right? Like Joey helped with some funding for some food. Jeremy had the exhibition and the space, right? I helped, obviously, with the curation of the process. So, I mean, everybody could offer a little bit to create something that is larger and then can reach more people in the community. And then some of the exhibitors in the exhibition are from the University of Michigan, and we had MSU as well. Tons of other collaborators in there. So that was, I think, the best thing. And then it also gave wide breadth of what types of fiber art is happening out there. So it just, again, provided more opportunity and more variety within the exhibition.
Yes.
There were a total of 15 institutions that came together to really make this thing happen. Wow. And we also hosted a little over 30 educators throughout the Midwest as part of the conference.
Which is just, once again, you when you don't know what's happening in the world of art, and then you hear something like this happening, especially for 14 years of gathering and celebrating educators and in the world of fiber art, I just think about the importance it means to you all. So if you can just really give your spiel, I guess you can say, or your love for fiber art and why you all have made it your life's work. So Heather, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, for me, fibers in general is kind of like essential for daily life. I mean, it's your clothes, it's your car fabric, it's around the house. So the materiality of it, I mean, I pick up a piece of paper and I feel like I have a moment with it. I'm like, oh, this piece of paper. And same with my scarf or anything like that. So I prefer the different materiality that you can get from fibers as a general statement of materials. But I'm a weaver, so I do mostly jacquard weaving, and then also I've been doing waffle weave, which is on my Dobby loom. And for that, it's more of the process of dyeing the fiber, spinning the yarn, threading the loom, weaving the fabric. So it's kind of like I have these building blocks, and it becomes this system, and then dimensional cloth. So I am also then attracted to the physicality of the material, even without touching it.
Yeah, I love that. And same thing to you, Jeremy. Why did you make this your life's work?
Yeah, I have to say, fiber itself reaches out to many different methods of thinking, and so I think about its relationship to cultural and historical connection. It's also a medium for storytelling and activism, which I think is a great kind of thing, and there's some works in the exhibition that really do that. It includes inclusive perspectives, which is really important. It also has healing and wellness kind of properties associated with it. A lot of times in art education, fiber is the medium that people will go to connect with their students. It also has an interesting intersection between art, craft, and design, and I think that it's a very expansive field that somebody can find their place within that world.
I love that so very much. I'm getting into knitting myself, so I'm going to try to find that love that's like you all have just described for us. But we have Jeremy Noonan, a professor and section lead of fiber and textiles at the College of Creative Study. Heather McCauley is a associate professor of fashion and fibers at Wayne State University. Fiber Flux, Midwest educators in textiles, fiber art, and material studies. That is on display right now through December 14th at Valade Gallery at the College of Creative Studies. Thank you both so much for being here and spreading the joy and love of fiber art here on the Metro.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
From the WDET newsroom, the U.S. government's automobile safety ratings are supposed to get a major update starting with the 2016 model year. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has finalized rules requiring new vehicles to have driver assistance technology and tests for protecting pedestrians. And 6 Michigan counties are suing the state's Public Service Commission. The Detroit Free Press reports nearly 80 local governments are taking the agency to court over its plan to override local zoning laws for citing solar and wind energy projects. Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed a law last year that lets communities keep some zoning control if they enact renewable energy ordinances.
Coming up, The Hideout was a storied concert venue in Clawson and hosted the likes of MC5 and Bob Seger. Now it's a community space that's home to all kinds of events. We'll explore what The Hideout was and uncover what it is now.
back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit's NPR station. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Before it became the Clawson Knights of Columbus Hall, hosting bingo nights and fish fries for Lent, the building was a raucous concert venue from 1966 to 1969. The Hideout was a series of teen clubs in Southeast Michigan, with its third location popping up in Clawson.
The MC5, many of Bob Seger's early groups, and the Subterraneans played there. Glenn Frey was the Subterranean singer. He left Detroit for Southern California, starting a little old band you've never heard of that didn't give us one of the most iconic songs I can think of. I'm talking about the Eagles.
Huh? But before this massive stardom, he told the Detroit Free Press that the Hideouts were the end of the rainbow. It was the groovy go-to spot after concerts. Now the building that once housed Clawson's Hideout and its history is in a precarious position.
Tia, you're so far out. Just bringing
Groovy.
all the lingo.
I'm a groovy
bringing
cat.
it back. Martin Hershak is a Detroit cartoonist and graphic designer. He's been hosting the Tales from the Clawson comic book and toy show for 3 years now at what was the Hideout.
He joins the show now to discuss the Hideout and a comic book show taking place there this Saturday. Welcome to the Metro, Martin.
Thank you.
Of course. So, what's special about the Clawson Hideout? How did it begin, and how has it changed over time?
That building is on Main Street in Clawson. 870 North Main Street was the site of the 60s rock bands that played there, and one of them was the MC5. And the way I'm tied in with that is I got to open up for Rob Tyner when I was in a band called the Screaming Freaks in 1990. So that was one of Rob's last shows in Detroit, and he wrote. I gave him a record that night. I asked him if he would sign my record album back in the USA by the MC5, and he wrote to Martin, "Keep the future free."
Yeah,
Rob Tyner, and I was really, really happy to receive that from him. But I never forgot the message of keeping a certain aspect of the Detroit music scene alive in that way.
And when I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about just that time, and you're opening up and you're seeing all these amazing bands come through this space. At that time, what are you thinking about Clawson and in this almost secret venue?
Well, it's a good show. It's been happening for 3 years. Every time we do it, we have artists featured there. That's part of keeping the future free. It's giving exposure to people that need it. You know, you don't want to charge them for that. That's what I'm doing. I'm giving the tables away.
Wow.
So I want every one of these artists to have a greater exposure in this area, which they've all got that. This coming show will feature Matt Fizzell, who did The Amazing Cynical Man. Steve Bama, who is a horror artist that's very closely aligned with Basil Gogos. He had done Famous Monsters of Filmland, and Steve looked at that and said, "Man, this is some serious inspiration."
Yeah.
And then the third one is Don England, who is a great, great horror artist. So that's the part of the show that is the most rewarding for me, is to showcase artists and give them a place to show their work to the world, in Detroit, at least in this, Metro Detroit area.
And Mark, when you talk about some of these artists and the world of comics and then the world of punk rock, which collided in Detroit at the Hideout, how did that happen?
Honestly, the Hideout was before my time, so I was not a witness to it. But I've heard stories after the fact, and in that case, like Iggy Pop, MC5, Bob Seger, The Frost. There was a lot of Detroit bands that played there, and that's kind of like the hidden history of the Hideout. It's like it's actually almost forgotten.
Yeah,
the hidden history of the Hideout. It's got a nice ring to it.
Alliteration.
Yeah, the manager there, her name was Jan, and she had stepped down last year. Jan Avery, a really, really nice lady that I got to meet. and her husband John. They worked there for quite a few years. They were basically volunteering there. That's what you do at a hall like that. It's all volunteer work. And the hall's being sold now. It's not. I wouldn't say it's in a precarious position. It's just going through a change.
It's evolving,
and it's going to become something else. I don't know what, but that's for the future. And we're just going to write it out till the very last minute there. And I think this is the last show there.
If you're just tuning into the Metro on WDET Public Radio in Detroit, we're chatting with Mark Herchek about comic books, punk rock, and why those histories have collided in Clawson. I just want to, we were talking just about preserving in the history there, but also talking about the artists and making sure that they have a space to freely show and display their work and their artwork. What is the scene right now, especially in the city of Detroit, when we talk about comics, artists, and comic art in general? But what's the scene like right now?
It's very good. It's always been great in Detroit. Detroit had a very long history of comics, starting back with the Undergrounds, and that goes back to Tales from the Ozone, which was created by the Grandy Ballroom, designed and produced by Carl Lundgren, Gary Grimshaw. And a lot of people, even Robert Crumb was involved with that. Back then he lived in Detroit for a little while. He actually designed the Boy Howdy logo for Cream magazine.
Yeah.
And Gary Grimshaw was the art director for that magazine. It's strange how all these people come together over time. Like Marvel Comics, DC Comics, and the Undergrounds all had a tie through the various artists that worked under all those banners. But occasionally their paths would cross.
Yeah.
Stan Lee and Carmine Infantino created the first Marvel DC crossover in 1975, Superman versus Spider-Man.
Oh.
And then from there, the floodgates opened to where now, Disney's involved. They own Marvel, and there's a lot going on in comics. The way I got involved in it was through the small press, and that was the fastest way to self-publish. Mm-hmm. You would just basically run up to Kinko's, draw your comics, hand fold them, staple them, and get them out, as fast as you could. That was, the independent press of the day. And since social media has taken over in the internet, that you can self-publish online now. But back in, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that was the way it was done, It was an underground type thing.
Yeah.
So you've seen the evolution of that DIY spirit in action. And we know there's a comic book show this Saturday at the Hideout. What's different about this show than all the other comic celebrations we see in Metro Detroit?
This one, well, we got all comics. That's for sure. I mean, it's not a bunch of filler of, movie stars and celebrity guests and things like that. We don't have any of that. It's just all comics. And that's what it wants to be, and that's what it is. And I think people have supported it for the last 3 years. They've come out pretty well attended. I'm really actually sorry to see it go. It's the end.
So this is going to be the last year.
Yeah, this will be the last one.
So why are you ending it? Because the Hideout's
Yeah, they're going to close,
Yeah.
and that building's going to be sold. So that's kind of like the end of it. Really,
You have no hopes of moving anywhere else?
we might move somewhere else. I mean, I got a show in Dearborn called the Detroit Comic Book and Toy Show, and I saw this coming last year, and that's why I started another show in Dearborn, just in case there was no chance of this, being revived. Then I would at least have that one in Dearborn.
Yes.
And also, just to clarify, my name is Marty Herchek. Not Mark, but
Marty.
But I guess that works too.
Oh, no, Marty.
Yeah.
Alrighty then. Well, Detroit cartoonist Marty Herchek, thanks for joining us on the Metro. We will see the Clawson Comic Book and Toy Show Saturday. Actually, it's coming up this Saturday, which is November 23rd.
Yes. Thank
Check
you
it
for
out.
having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Coming up, Donald Trump has promised to do two things that could really impact other countries. That includes tariffs and deportations. How might those things affect Canada and more specifically, Windsor? We'll speak with Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkens about that next. Stay with us.
Metro on WDET FM, Detroit's public radio station. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. President-elect Donald Trump doesn't have many concrete plans for what he wants to do when he gets into office. His policy list is pretty thin, but there are two things he's talked about a lot: deportations and tariffs.
Trump plans to deport millions of people in the U.S. who don't have legal status. Yesterday, he said he would use the military to carry out this plan. He also wants to use tariffs to develop industry here. The U.S. shares a border with Mexico and Canada, and those countries could be hurt by these policies.
To talk about how this might look in Canada, and specifically in Windsor, we have Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkens here. Mayor Dilkens, welcome to the Metro.
Good morning.
So, Mayor Dilkens, what was your initial reaction to President-elect Trump winning the election here in the U.S.?
Well, I don't think I was entirely surprised. Certainly, in living on the border and watching the campaign play out, there was lots of interesting things that were being said. And, at the end of the day, I don't have a horse in the race living in Canada and being Canadian, but it was fascinating political science to watch, and it's going to be an interesting 4 years moving forward.
Yes, fascinating political science and political drama. On the internet, Mayor, there's been a spike in Americans looking up the possibility of getting Canadian citizenship. Do you anticipate a lot of Americans trying to become Canadians?
No, I don't think so. I think the Google search, once they look at the pathway and they realize it's a lot of work and it's not as easy. It's not as easy as you think. I don't see that being a reality for most people.
So, Mayor Dilkens, Trump has threatened to deport millions of people. If that happens, how do you see it affecting Windsor, if at all?
Well, our country, and my city too, has had and seen a huge impact from the open border between the United States and Mexico. So all of the millions of people who have crossed in the last 4 years, many of them have made their way up to Canada, crossed illegally into the country. And so in my city today, I've got two hotels who overlook the Detroit River and stare at Detroit, full of people who have crossed into our country, waiting for their cases to be adjudicated by our immigration and refugee group in Canada. And so they're here, and the kids are in school, and they get free health care, and they're just waiting. And so since that process happened, where there was lots of illegal crossings happening in Quebec and people being redistributed in our country, Canada and the United States agreed to a safe third country agreement, which means if you're entering Canada to claim refugee status from the United States, you're now required to wait in the United States to have your case adjudicated. We're no longer going to put you up on hotels and have you hang out here. And so I've heard Mr. Holman, the border czar that President-elect Trump is going to appoint, talk about wanting to have a safe Mexico agreement again, where those coming from Mexico into the United States would have to wait again for their cases to be adjudicated in Mexico and not be allowed to be in the United States. So that has proven to be effective to slow down the number of people crossing illegally into Canada. And we'll just have to see what happens. I think the president-elect will have issues with respect to, all of the priorities he's put forward and the funding to enable all of those priorities to happen. I think you'll have to be very surgical in the way he deals with the immigrants that he hopes to deport.
So on your end, are you tightening the border on the Canadian side?
Well, listen, it's a great question. It's an interesting question because most of us, law-abiding citizens, we just know the border that we cross. We go over the Ambassador Bridge or through the Windsor-Detroit Tunnel. Next year, we'll be able to cross at the Gordie Howe Bridge. And we're going through these fortified gates where there's armed guards and there's sensors and, cameras in place. But let's be real here. I mean, the border between the United States and Canada is the world's longest undefended border, which is nothing but a series of fortified gates and no fence. There are many places between our two countries where it's very easy to cross illegally if you're intent on doing that. Mm-hmm. And certainly even between Windsor and Detroit, it's not that hard to get a jet ski or a rowboat and cross from one country to the other. And so we collectively, in the U.S. and in Canada, we do not have enough human resources to practically cover all of the open space of the border between our two countries. But we're going to have to work together to make sure that we're using technology and that we're supporting one another. Because I have always said, if there is a bad guy that gets let into the United States or crosses illegally into the United States, that's bad for Canada. And the same thing here. If we let someone into our country that's a bad guy, that's bad for the United States. We have a goal to really work on shared perimeter security, and I think we should be really working towards that end to make sure that we have good people coming into both countries.
If you're just joining us, this is The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent alongside Tia Graham. We're speaking with Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkens about how Canadians are reacting to the news of Trump's presidency. Now, Mayor Dilkens, Canadians are really upset right now with their own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and the Liberal government. They're complaining about some of the same things Americans are concerned about: unaffordable homes, rising grocery prices, crime rates. Tell me, what are you hearing in Windsor?
Well, all of those things. It's a mess here. And I think, our next election is scheduled for October of next year. With 100% certainty, there will be a change in government. I can guarantee that just from the public sentiment here, that there will be a change in government at the federal level. And frankly, now that we know that Donald Trump will be the president of the United States, I think it's appropriate that we do have that change in government, that we get people aligned on the same page that can work together effectively. And I think, a good prime minister needs to have a good domestic agenda and domestic currency to be able to move an agenda forward with the United States. This prime minister doesn't have any domestic capital here. And so I think it's just going to be a mess from January 2025 until our election is held sometime next year.
Well, Mayor Dilkens, we know in the U.S. as in Canada as well that local politics can really have the biggest impact on a person's life. So what are you trying to do at the local level in Windsor to ease people's concerns and address some of the issues that they're facing?
Well, listen, affordability is a huge issue here, and housing affordability. We've seen prices of real estate jump to a level that, most people used to look at Toronto and say those are Toronto real estate prices. Well, a lot of those prices are now in Windsor. And so people are dealing with inflation and affordability, and we're doing everything we can at the municipal level to keep our tax rates low and help support people through this challenging time. And then I think, it's fair to say we have this perhaps a global problem, but certainly a continental problem with mental health and addiction that's playing out in each of our cities. And we're seeing that to some extent here, even though we're better than most other cities that I see in my country, we still see challenges here that need to be dealt with. And it's advocating for the right supports and making sure that we have laws in place that are tough on crime and being able to deal with some of the challenges that come with dealing with people who are struggling with addiction-related issues.
Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkens, we will be talking to you soon about some of your efforts when it comes to addressing mental health in Windsor. Thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Have a great afternoon.
That's the Metro for Tuesday, November 19th.
That's right. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and you want to support the Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate.
This is WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.
Thanks so much for listening.
Have a good day.
We'll see you tomorrow.